Hey, it's your book hound here, coming at you again with another book review, a book we want to howl about, as we say. If you like what you see here, I hope you'll subscribe. We got great book reviews and special offers and all kinds of fun stuff coming at you all the time. So today we're going to talk about a book called 1989. That's the whole title of the book, 1989, by Val McDermid. Now, 1989 is a book about, wait for it, the year 1989. And it features a character named Allie, who is a Scottish-born investigative reporter living in Manchester, England. She is in a lesbian relationship with another woman named Rona, and they have a nice life together. And we forget, but 1989, that was a little bit unusual. It wasn't completely unusual, but it still wasn't. People weren't really open about stuff like this. It's like a little bit scandalous, and Allie, unfortunately, is in a situation where her parents don't want to talk to her because they disapprove of her life with Rona. So that's part of the backstory. And the book is partly a reflection on how the world has changed in the last 34 years. It's hard to believe that it's been that long. I was 24 years old in 1989, and I was involved in producing TV movies at the time, which is one of the many sort of relics of that era that no longer exist, along with things like, cassette recorders and cell phones the size of cinder blocks, and, green screen computers and all fax machines and all these things that were considered exciting in 1989, but really in retrospect were kind of clunky. Anyway, Allie is a reporter working for a chain of newspapers owned by a man named Ace Lockhart. And Ace Lockhart is a stand-in for a man named Robert Maxwell. In fact, like I say in the written review, which you can find linked in below, it's like an insult to thin veils to call him a thinly veiled reference to Robert Maxwell. I mean, the character might as well be called like Norbert Haxwell or something. He is an physically enormous man who came out of nowhere, an Eastern European Jew who built a vast fortune in the publishing business. In this book, it's called Pythagorean Press. In real life, it was called Pergamon Press. And then bought a chain of newspapers and competed with Rupert Murdoch. And all of this is in the book. And the reason this is important is that Robert Maxwell was a ruthless businessman and a notorious cost cutter, and he's cut Allie's responsibilities down to the bone, and she's overworked and covering these stupid stories that are sensational, but she hates them, and she's not allowed to do investigative work, which is what she really wants to do. And she's not that happy, honestly. And in parallel, and this is not a spoiler because it's literally in the first couple pages of the book, somebody sneaks into Ace Lockhart's country house and puts poison in his bottle of vitamins. So somewhere along the line, you think most likely this guy is going to be poisoned to death, and you're kind of waiting for that to happen, unfortunately. And the book originally, the book she's a very good writer, but I have a criticism of the book is it takes quite a while for this story to get going. A lot of the book, the first 100 pages or so, is kind of more about the atmosphere, about the relationship with Rona, their friends, what people are wearing, music. I mean, it's like, okay, it's the scene, and that's when I start to realize this book was not written for me. It's more, maybe more for a woman a female reader might find it more engaging. But she's writing an investigative story about the AIDS epidemic and how the health department and the medical profession and the drug companies are not doing right by the people who have AIDS. And this was true in 1989. It was very tragic that people who had AIDS were ignored or blamed for their illness. They were shamed, and a lot of people died alone and in terrible pain. Whatever. It was a terrible era, and so that's one of the reasons she's writing the book, is to remind us, what happened, because it's been largely forgotten. But anyway, that's the beginning of the book, and the reviewers call McDermid the Queen of Crime, and I'm like, this doesn't sound like the Queen of Crime. It just seems like sort of a atmospheric relationship book about a lesbian newspaper reporter. But then the plot starts to get going, and a lot of it involves a character named Genevieve Lockhart, who is, again, a thinly veiled reference to Ghislaine Maxwell, who you might have heard about her in the news recently. She was sentenced to prison for working with Jeffrey Epstein and co-opting young girls into sex trafficking and so forth. But she's, in the book, is presented as a character who she's running Pythagorea's Press, and she's trying to be independent, but she's also kissing her father's ass. And she gets herself into a lot of trouble and has to be rescued. And Allie is trying to solve that mystery and others. And there's a lot of, it goes behind the Iron Curtain into East Germany. And in 1989 was the year when the Soviet system started to fall apart. And so if you're familiar with 1989, like the first part of the year, people thought, well, the Soviet bloc has been in existence for 44 years and it'll be around for another 1,000 years and nothing's ever going to change. And then all of a sudden everything changed really quickly. So the book is kind of dealing with the behind the scenes of what was going on and the intrigue, and you're dealing with East German Stasi and all kinds of stuff like that. So there's a lot of cloak and dagger, and the suspense gets really good. I mean, that's what's funny. The book takes about 100 pages to get going, and then it's a really good suspense book. So maybe she is the queen of crime after all. She's finally has her coronation in the middle of the book. Anyway, it's an effective book for a certain kind of reader. It's probably not, well, it really wasn't for me, but I can see why people like her. And if you like history, it's also an interesting reflection on what things were like just over 30 years ago when the world was a bit different from the way it is now.